Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel of the People Mentor. I'm really excited today. I can't wait, honestly, for this interview. I've got Lisa here, and Lisa is shown as holistic life coaching, but I was drawn to Lisa because of her insights on grief and how to handle it and how to work with people to support them in the best possible way. So, Lisa, without any further ado, please introduce yourself. I'm so pleased to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much, Nicola. It's lovely to be here. Yes, I am a holistic life coach and grief educator. So those are the things that I do as a business. And more importantly, I'm a mom of two adult daughters that are the joy of my life and going to be married in July. So, yes. So
Exciting.
it throws people because I live in the UK, but I certainly don't sound British. So I am American. I'm from Seattle, but I've lived in the UK for about 19 years now.
Right. So it's quite a long time
Yes.
and still very strong accent.
Yes, I
So
think when I came over, I was like 35, so you don't really lose it at that age.
no, you don't, do you? So lots of life experiences with you that have made you to where you are now and helped you form your business, haven't you? And I think the one thing that struck me was when I looked at your LinkedIn profile was you'd experienced losing 12 loved ones in 22 months. I mean, that must have been horrendous. So can you share what helped you get through such an intense period of multiple losses? I mean, that must have been incredibly difficult.
Yes, yeah, it was. I growing up, I mean, I lost a grandmother, my aunt, but I didn't really have a lot of losses. And so it just seemed that they all happened in a very short period of time. Again, being from Seattle and living 4,000 miles away, you're always dreading those phone calls.
Oh, yeah.
Your parents aren't getting any younger. And so I received those phone calls. But what happened in 2018, January, the very first phone call was that we lost our niece from my ex-husband's side of the family. She had a long history of hereditary illness. And then a week later, I got the call from my mom that my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer.
Oh no, how
And
awful.
that was when kind of the earth opened up and swallowed me. I'm very close to my parents. So I ended up quitting my job, moving back to Seattle to care for my dad and my mom. I mean, they'd been married for 50 plus
Mm.
years. And so I stayed there until my dad passed away 8 months later. And during that time, I had lost some friends as well to cancer. And then when my dad passed, I came back to the UK. And I then, and leaving my mom was really difficult,
Mm.
of course. And so she came to visit a few months later, and we traveled around the UK. She stayed for a couple months. We had a great time. It was weird because my dad is always with her, but we did the best we could. And then I dropped her off at Manchester Airport, and I just didn't know that that would be the last time that I would hug my mom.
Oh,
She passed away in her sleep a few months later. And we talked every day, and she wasn't answering her messages. And I was calling and messaging. And then I started saying to my brother and to everybody, like, when was the last time you saw mom? And go over there, get over there. And I had already knew, in my heart of hearts, I already knew that she had passed. And so I was just waiting for that phone call. I then went back to Seattle and did another eulogy. And my parents passed away. My mom passed away 14 months after my dad. Um, and then 2 months after my mom, I got the worst call in the middle of the night that my 24-year-old son-in-law, Jack, had passed away from a fall in front of my daughter. And We lived in up north in Chester, and I had to get down to Derby in the middle of the night just to get to her. And, I had friends, children from 2018 to 2019. So you're right, it was horrendous. And it felt like every time you lifted your head up, you got hit again. I didn't want to answer the phone. I mean, it was anxiety and depression, obviously, and just grief stricken and not understanding and knowing how to navigate. But what I did, Nicola, is I tried to throw everything at it.
Hmm.
So when my mom passed away, I didn't really do much after my dad. I just tried to rest and recover and cry in the car and cry in the shower and like just try to put one foot in front of the other with work and so on. But after my mom passed, I thought I've got to get some help. So the very first thing I did was I hired a bereavement counselor. She was fantastic. And I stayed with her for probably a year because I was processing, because then Jack passed and I just
Yeah.
needed that. So then I started throwing everything at it in the sense of going to yoga and sound bath healing and energy work and like acupuncture and Zumba and hiking. I honestly tried everything. And then when my therapist, my counselor said to me, like, Lisa, it's okay. Because I thought I have to just sit in this. Like, I have to work through it. I have to just keep going, keep going. And she said, sometimes it's okay to not. Like sometimes it's okay to not do anything.
Mm.
Sometimes it's okay to just go, no, not, I could just, today I just can't do the grief. Like, so then I'd put my hoodie over my head, eat popcorn and chocolate and watch Netflix. Like I just, so I even did that.
Yeah.
So
And
I tried everything.
it totally makes sense. So my father died in 2014, and I had one day off from work and carried on. Um, and work was extremely stressful, and I had a manager who wasn't very understanding. Now, at the initial point, he'd been really poorly in hospital, and I just knew that he probably wasn't going to last much longer. And he actually did manage to get home. We had quite a fraught time in the hospital as well because we didn't feel they were very supportive with him. It almost felt like they'd just written him off because he was older. So, and then with the stress of work as well, and then he died, and then a few days later after his funeral, um, I had a heart attack, and it was like the two worlds had collided. I was heartbroken, and it just happened. And I really hadn't let any grief out, hadn't shown any emotion, thought I needed to be the strong one. So I totally get where you're coming from. So I think the next time my brother died before my mum, and that was an absolute shock. He'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he had less than a month, and I couldn't go and see him because he said he didn't want anybody to see him, outside of his like sons and his wife. And it was very hard not to say goodbye. And also he was like the person I looked to because my dad had disappeared and gone. And so when he died, though, I really went to pieces.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was funny. It was like I was letting everything out for my dad and him.
Yes,
So,
I think that's such a good point, Nicola. This is quite common that, a loss, then we try to do our best and if we're suppressing it and then another loss happens, it does and can open the floodgates, and now you're grieving multiple
yeah.
losses at the same time, as well as your health, and what you experience and the trauma you experience having a heart attack. Like these are massive,
Mm,
massive things and massive losses.
they
Yeah.
are because, I mean, like you say, grief isn't just like losing someone. And I know you've talked about this before. So the fact that I lost my health because angina afterwards, and I'm fine walking on the flat, but some days I can be really bad. Some days I'll get really bad angina, and other days I can't. And it's not something I particularly like sharing, especially when you're walking with other people and they're walking really fast and I'm out of breath. And you grieve the fact that you're not that one person you once were.
Yes, absolutely. And when we talk about different types of loss, you're right. This is something that I do try very hard to educate. As a certified grief educator, I think it is important to educate that there are so many different types of loss. It's not just the loss of a loved one through death. You could go through a divorce or parental alienation or loss of a pet or loss of a job or loss of finances or loss of your health and independence. And even a loss of a dream of what you thought your life was going to look like. So when people do come to me, it's about validating, this is grief, this is what this is, and processing through it. So you're so right. And what I also find, like, even when someone passes away, it's not just quote unquote the loss of the loved one's presence, it's all the hundreds of losses previous and for the future. So it is, when they say it comes in waves, it's because of that. It just
Mm.
bam, it hits you, and bam, it hits you. So it makes sense that you're right. You're grieving the loss of your health, and what you could have done previously, you're now more limited.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really takes us nicely on to what are some of the most common misconceptions people have about grief, do you think?
It's a good question. I think logically, a lot of us will say, oh, okay, well, everybody grieves differently. But how that actually plays out is very different. Everybody does grieve differently. And it also, one of the things I think is really important is that depending on the relationship with the person you lost, you might grieve differently or need different things
Yeah,
for each time that happens.
yeah,
Um, so everybody grieves differently, and you can also be very surprised that you grieve differently for different people, and different experiences because of the relationship. And also, I think we know there's no timeline, but yet some people do. You still, like, it's been a year. Why am I
yeah.
hit the 1 year mark? So after 1 year, I should be good, and I'm not, or 2 years, or so we put a time limit on it for ourselves, and or others do that for us, or they go, um, oh, well, he lived a great life. Like, he was 73, like, he was
Yeah.
older, he lived a great life. And that then doesn't really validate your loss. So there's a lot of misconceptions around grief. And we can talk about some of the things that people say and
Mm.
do that maybe aren't as helpful. But those are kind of the real, I mean, those are the ones I hear most. Like, my friend just said, or my husband just said, like, aren't you done yet? I mean, it's been 2 years. What's going on? Like, get over it, and that you can just get over losing a loved
And
one.
it
And you
doesn't
never do.
work. It doesn't work like
No,
that at all.
of course you don't.
And yeah, I mean, it's been, I'm thinking it's 5 years since my mum died, and it's 2014 for dad. So it will still hit me now and then. Something
Yes.
will happen, or some memory will come flooding back in. One of the things I did find really helpful when my mother passed away, and we also had my mother-in-law 2 weeks before, so it was quite an intense period, was actually I'd got all the photos in the house from her house and just went through them all and just talking about what they were showing me. And my daughters came around and we did that together, and that really did help me. And I
Yes.
think I hadn't done that with any of the previous
Mm.
deaths, so I think that really did make a difference. So,
Yes, and that is so interesting. I always say to people, do what you feel that you need to do at that time. So I remember when my dad passed away, I didn't really look directly at the photos. And also after Jack, I definitely, and even to this day, I really struggled to look at the photos, although I know that it's an important part of the healing process. I
mm,
struggle. But you're right. After my mom passed away, and we went to the home that, my brother and I were raised in, we had all the kids there, like their grandkids, and we just went through 8 million photos. Like, who's this? I don't know. So we get rid of it. But then we'd talk and reminisce. And I think that that's another maybe misconception, is that, oh, I don't want to talk, I don't want to ask,
Yeah,
Nicola about her mom because it'll bring up emotion. But actually, we want to talk about our loved ones. We want to tell funny stories, and we want to tell memories. And so we know that they've passed. It's not like if you bring it up, we're going to go, what? They died? I mean, we know they died, but they also lived, and they still live. They still live in our lives and our memories, and we share DNA, and we want to talk about them. There's nothing more that I enjoy is talking about my loved ones and sharing stories and talking about Jack, and what type of person he was at such a young age of passing away. He lived such a full life, and how he loved my daughter so deeply. And I love talking about that. So I'm glad
yeah.
you brought that up, because that is so important. That's so healing.
I think it really is, isn't it? And I love the fact that my husband will say little things like I scratch my head and I use this finger, and my dad used to do that, and he'll go, "Oh, that's just how your dad did it." And it's just those little triggers that mean that they're still part of you,
Yeah.
and that you've carried on. To me, it's like carrying on the genes, the family history, and the all of that bit that makes you what you are. So yeah,
Yes.
so it's really interesting, isn't it? The different ways that we do grieve as well.
Yes.
And you mentioned that grieving people aren't broken, they're grieving. So how does this perspective shape your approach to, how you do your grief coaching?
Yeah, I think it's really important to distinction, because while our heart is broken and our soul feels crushed, it's this really kind of deep despair. It's something that you can't even really put words to it. And you do feel like you're broken, that you're never ever going to be able to get up and put one foot in front of the other, or breathe in, breathe out. Like you're not ever going to really, you're not really truly going to smile or laugh. Like you
Yeah,
can't see that when you're in the acute grief. And so when I say to people, listen, you're not broken, you're grieving. This is what's happening. And it's almost like they go, I'm not crazy. I'm not, because I feel crazy because I've got grief brain, grief fog, or my body is responding with this anxiousness and
yeah,
panic attacks, and they feel like they're crazy, but actually it's grief. So it not only I can see them go, oh, thank God I'm not crazy. And two, it's just validating that they've had such a significant, painful, soul crushing loss.
yeah. It's really weird, isn't it? Because like when my daughter left to go to Shetland 3 years ago, that was a type of grief. I absolutely, because she'd been up the road, and it was like I've lost a limb.
Yes, yes.
That's
One
how
thing
it
I
felt.
didn't talk about is empty nesting, and but
Yeah.
it is huge. It's huge loss, even though they're still here, thankfully, and but yeah, it's
But it was
absolutely a
weird
loss.
because she didn't even live with us. She only lived up the road. But the fact was she'd been that close, and suddenly, yeah. And it's like you say, the empty nesting, it's all the same kind of feeling. And you just feel like you've lost a major part of you for a while. And it takes a
Yes,
while to get back onto an even keel, I would say.
yes, and I think we need to really be kind to ourselves during these
Mm,
life's challenges, or what I call dumpster fires. It's like we need to be really gentle with ourselves, because it does hit you. And I think sometimes when I say, when people are in real acute grief or loss or empty nesting, or sometimes it's so energy draining, and sometimes it's just so, I remember thinking, oh, it's exhausting taking a shower. I mean, I did it, but do I have to like put on makeup? Like, I don't want to do anything. I'm so exhausted just to even brush my teeth, sometimes when you're really in that
yeah,
difficult part.
yeah, definitely. So I'm really interested in what would you suggest are best ways to support loved ones who are grieving. And then when we've done that bit, can we talk about the workplace as well? Because I've got some lovely stories from the workplace to share. So let's start with the loved ones and how you support them.
Yes, I think this is one of the things I'm really, really passionate about from my own experience and experience with clients and friends, and listening to what others say. So I created this like free guide because I thought we need some practical tools on how to support a grieving loved one. You know, we're
Absolutely.
so afraid of what to say if we say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, or I don't know what to do. So I thought, well, let's put some things together. So when I talk about this, it's more about the grief of losing a loved one through
Yeah.
death. And I always say, don't say the placations. They're in a better place. They lived a great life. They wouldn't want you to cry. You know, all of those things. I mean, there's so many of them that you're like, don't time heals all wounds. That's another really great
Oh,
one.
yeah.
That's not true. So just stop with that. I mean, is there healing, which I know we can talk about, but yeah, of course, but just don't say those things because it isn't helpful to the person who is grieving, especially if they're in that acute grief. It's very recent. But really, anytime is not good. I say just leave that one at the door. And the things you can say instead is like, I am here for you. I love you. Any of those kinds of comment, say nothing at all and sit with them. It depends, of course, on the relationship that you have with that
Yeah.
person. Get to their house, or if you live far away, and or maybe you're not as particularly close to that person, but you want to say something. This is what I always tell people when you go to message them on whatever platform you message them on, start out with, you do not need to respond. And then say, I love you. I'm here for you. I support you. Whatever words you say that are encouraging about how much you love them, um, thinking of you, sending hugs, whatever it is. But always start out with the you do not need to reply. Now, 9 times out of 10, they do reply. But what that does is it takes off the pressure of them feeling guilty because they haven't replied to hopefully a lot of messages because they're super loved. And it really just gives them the freedom to go, okay, well, I know they're there in the peripheral, but I don't need to respond, and they're not going to be upset or angry with me.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say is one of the most important things when you're messaging people.
That's really interesting. And such a good point because otherwise you're just making that person make them think of you instead.
Yes, exactly. And what you want to do is take as much pressure off of that
Mm,
person as possible. So again, 9 times out of 10, they respond, thank you so much, or send a heart or something. But you just know that they don't need, you're just sending your love to them. And you want them to know that you're there.
yeah.
Because one of the things that I would say in the don't category is don't ignore them, don't ghost them. This is one of the biggest things I hear. And, I've had that happen, but I just kind of didn't even bother with it. I'm like, whatever. But for some people, it is absolutely devastating that their friends or coworkers or whatever just ignore them completely. It is the worst thing you can do. Now we can psychoanalyze and go why they're doing it. They don't know what to say.
Yeah.
They're like they don't want to make you cry and upset you. But I'm telling everyone, do not do that. Even if
Yeah.
you're just like, I don't know what to say, give a hug. Whatever it is that you need to do, but don't ghost them. And I always say, like, think about the things that you do on a daily basis. So you, let's say, clean or walk the dog, or you have your children, you have to drop them off at school, or you have to go to grocery shopping. And the things that you do on a daily or weekly basis, doing your laundry, these are things that just feel next to impossible for somebody who is in acute grief. This is so, so difficult for them to even think about doing their laundry or cooking, So I have some friends who lost their only child. He passed away in a car accident. And he died on my dad's birthday, and it was my dad's first birthday. He wasn't with us, and my mom was here. And I see the message that Zach had passed away in a car accident. It was just, what do you say?
Yeah,
There's literally nothing you can say, and I love them so much. They're just the best humans. And then it was like, get the families together, friends together, and just give them some meals. Like, just sit there and make sure they try to eat. They may or may not eat, but they don't even have to think about food. They don't, it just shows up at their door. They can throw it away. It doesn't matter. So it is about those practical things
mm,
that people can do. I spoke to somebody who said, for after she lost her son, for a year and a half, her friend went grocery shopping for her every
oh,
week for a year and a half. Because, I mean, think about it. You go to the grocery store, there's just a gazillion people, and someone's like, "Have a nice day." And this is in America, so they always say that. Or, "How are you today?" And you're like, "This is, why are you even asking me that? Just ask me if I found everything okay." Or.
yeah, exactly.
So that to me was just a beautiful thing to do.
Yeah, and it makes absolute sense because the last thing they're going to be thinking about food, they're probably going to miss meals, which is going to make them feel even worse. Um, so you're right, it's absolutely, and just being there for them. If they want
Yeah.
to talk, they talk. I've had people walk past me on the opposite side of the road so that they don't have to say anything to me. And I just find that really bizarre because you just have to say, I'm really sorry about your news and, and just let them know that you care.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I know it can sound harsh, but I say to people, remember, this isn't about you. This is about them.
Yeah,
So if you
exactly.
really want to support your loved one, now, you can carry the grief of others. And I get that. I carried my daughter's grief, both of my girls' grief, because my oldest daughter loved Jack. Like, that was her brother. Um, and so you're carrying the grief of others, carried the grief of my mom. You just carry that grief. But then I would get in the car and drive home and just cry all the way home, cry in the, I mean, then I was like, God, I need a therapy session. Like, then I started, and then I went into got a life coach. And it was like, these are the things that I did then to ground myself after I left, my daughter or my mom, so yes, you might be uncomfortable, but it's about the person who's grieving. And then you can go away and use some tools to ground yourself.
Yeah, really, really important. And
Mhm.
certainly the last few years, I've done quite a few different things which have helped me. Um, so that's how with the loved ones, workplace is quite a minefield. Managers aren't given training on how to handle grief of any kind in the workplace. And I think, well, when I left in 2020 corporately, they were just starting to roll out little bits. Now, I lost my brother and I went into work and I was just sat there and it suddenly hit me. And it'd only been a couple of days. I'd gone back to work. Um, and my manager looked at me and said, "Are you all right?" And I was just tears streaming down my face. I said, "I'm just really upset about my brother." And he just laughed because it was a nervous reaction because he didn't know. But it was the worst thing he could have done, really. So
Yeah.
we really need to equip our managers better. And then I remember going on to the very first um, big forum they had for the managers about grief and how to manage somebody with grief. Worst thing I could have done was go on it actually because I'd lost my mum, I'd lost my mother-in-law, and I was really at a really low ebb. And I went on. My manager had not been supportive at all, hadn't said one word, had done exactly what you said, ghosted because he didn't know what else to do. And it was really because he had no idea. Um, And I went on this forum and they were talking about things, and out of nowhere, luckily it was just audio because I just suddenly burst into tears and said, I need to say that my manager's been pants at this, and he was on the call as well. And then I said, we need to get better at dealing with people who are grieving, who have gone through loss of any kind. And it was amazing the amount of love and support I got back. I got loads of messages in my chat. And then a manager who I'd never really been that close to, who was like, part of the team, but not my manager. She spent sort of sent me a message, and then when I went to a session away, she was there, and she said, "Let's just stop for a cup of tea at a cafe before we go to this forum thing." And she just gave me time and just listened
Mm.
to me, and she'd got it down to a T. So they needed more people like her, but they needed to share those insights because people, unless they've been through it, they don't know it, do they?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And that experience is, I know, what propels you to do what you do. And I think this is the important part and the important message in the training that I do, grief in the workplace training, is crucial for any organization because you're right. We don't really know how to deal with grief and loss of any kind, divorce, any kind.
No,
But the reality is 100% of people will experience a form of loss or multiple losses in their life of some sort. So,
absolutely.
and they're employed. And so, what we're not saying is managers and directors and CEOs and supervisors have to be the counselor. They have to sit with you for 3 hours and give you all the tools that you need. No, but they need to create a safe space
Yeah,
for you. What do you need? Maybe you need to work from home. Maybe whatever kind of support you need, and then signpost you to people who can take care of
absolutely.
you, right?
Yeah.
Therapist, coach, somebody that they can signpost. One of the things that I get when I have approached this subject with some corporations or some solicitor firms in we have EAP. I'm, I know you've got employee assisted pro. That isn't what I'm talking about. That's
No,
not what I'm talking about. You're signposting your people to whatever help. And I don't know the statistic, but probably pretty high, which you might know, is that they don't make contact with EAP.
most don't phone
Yes.
because many a time as a manager, regardless of what the issue was, you would have a conversation with your team member and you would suggest that was one option. And there's still this misconception that it's not that it's going to go back to the manager, it's going to go back to the business. And so
Yes.
people are very loath to do it. And
Yes.
actually, the ones that did do this actually reaped benefits, absolutely got support. But so many miss out because they have that misconception. But that isn't the answer, as you say, is it? It's
Yes.
it's about equipping our managers to, as you say, create that safe space
Yes.
and realize that there's probably going to be a dip in performance, but that's okay. It's
Yes. And
natural.
exactly. And this is the kind of information where we're talking about educating the managers, the people who look after staff, and giving them some tools so that they feel better equipped
Mm,
because it is going to, if it hasn't already happened, it will. And also recognizing that someone actually is grieving. So, sometimes we think, oh, what's wrong with that person? But
yeah,
actually, oh, they're going through a divorce and they're being parental alienation. They haven't seen their children. Like this is massive. So
absolutely.
these are really important things to give them just some tools to be able to recognize and then give them the support and signpost them. I got off the phone with a wonderful solicitor who is the managing director of a firm, a small firm, and her whole ethos is taking care of her team and her people and that
Brilliant.
empathy. And that I was like, first of all, let's just acknowledge that you're doing this right. Um,
Exactly.
they know that you aren't, they're not a number, that they are supported. And however, and she's like, yeah, I mean, maybe their performance dips, but that's the last thing I actually really am concerned about. I'm concerned about them as a human. And I thought, oh my god, like
Uh,
this is what we
Yes,
need. And so that's part of the training where I go in or do it by Zoom, is to educate HR managers, line managers, directors, anybody who is overseeing staff, because it is so important. And I've been in the corporate world, and when I was going through these losses, after my dad, because I quit my job and moved to Seattle, and then when I came back, I needed to get a new job, and it was the best job for me because that's when I lost my mom, and I lost Jack, and I lost Zach, and there was so many people that I had lost during that time, and they were so amazing for me.
that's brilliant.
Yeah,
That's absolutely brilliant.
yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking about, because we've talked about different types of loss, and I was thinking about when I got divorced, I had the most unsympathetic manager. She was of the old school. You left your problems at the office door and you did not take them into the office. And of course, you just can't do that. You can't just park from there. Some people can, but not many. And it does affect you. And I think often what I see is that people are maybe acting out of character. And instead of sitting down and having a informal chat about what's going on, how can I support you? I'm here if you need to offload, and then obviously pointing them in the right direction to the right person. People either ignore it or else they go in all guns blazing and act like, instead of just trying to understand what's going on. And that
Mm.
frustrates me terribly, I have to say.
Yes, totally. And the thing is, with that experience that you had, that old school, we now know years later, decades later, we're learning that that just is not good. Like it is sitting, the trauma, the pain, it's sitting in our bodies. So we're going to be ill later. It's going to manifest itself in some way,
Mm,
whether that be short and snippy or angry or crying or yes, you can put your head down, which many of us do right at our age, like we just keep
yeah,
going, but it impacts relationships within the work, at home. I mean, and so what I always think is it's there, it's sitting there, let's get it out because it's sitting in
absolutely.
there and festering. So let's get it out. So no more of this old school, I'm not telling anybody my problem. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just leave it at the door. No,
Yes.
no,
It
no,
doesn't
no.
work that way. We're human beings and we are
Exactly.
having human experience, not
Exactly.
robots.
It doesn't work anyway. So, what made you decide to focus specifically on grief coaching? Was it your experiences or something else?
Yes. So I, when I was working at this job that was amazing, it was during COVID. I honestly heard weirdly, like not audible, but like, Lisa, you need to be a life coach. And like, I literally didn't know what that was. And I had to Google what a life coach was. I didn't even know what that was. And I thought, well, if I want to be one, I better hire one. And that's when I hired a coach. So I went down the rabbit hole of figuring out what schooling to go to. So I went and got my certification. Then I got my hours in and got my accreditation. And during that time, personal development has been something that I have loved and been really, really passionate about for a long time, and change and learning and all of that, personal growth, self growth, that kind of thing. So for me, as an action oriented person, that was an easy niche because they talk about making, get your niche down. And I'm
Yeah,
like, well, that's easy. This is what I've been doing for years. I can help other people kick out roadblocks and get living their life. Obviously, with the losses, what it does is it changes you and it changes the trajectory of your life. So you go,
absolutely.
life is short, fragile, and it's too short and fragile to be miserable. So I went and did the schooling, but there was always this kind of like grief in my ear. And I was like, oh, don't know if I want to do this. Am I healed enough? Is this really the direction? Do I want to go down that route? And at some point, I'm just like, right. I mean, it was more of a calling. I feel like with the
Yeah,
life experience that I've had, I'm a little bit further down the road and I can turn around and I can help
yeah,
somebody else who was me several years ago and kind of help them through that process.
yeah. I think you're right there. I think you have to be at your right stage. And the reason I say that is because I'm just thinking I did a workshop a few years ago on difficult conversations, and there was a lady there who has said that she had lost somebody fairly recently and it was still very raw with her. And her question, which, being honest, threw me somewhat, was if I have a team member who comes in and they've lost somebody close to them, I don't think I could have the conversation. So, how would I manage this? Um, so there was a conversation with other people in the room as well, and there was some discussion around whether it should be then the manager's manager or another manager. And I went away and I couldn't really say that I ever came out with a definite answer because I think it all depends on the circumstances and what's going on. Um, and also, I suppose you've got to think about the relationship you've already got with that person. So, out of interest, what would you have said to that one?
It is such a difficult one because that's the activating of emotions and their loss
Yeah.
that comes out. I would 100% agree. It depends on the relationship that they have. If it's a good relationship, then and the person feels like they can share openly, um, and have a good cry together. Go, I've lost some, and just talk like normal human beings, not boss and,
Yeah,
employee and all of that. If they don't have that relationship, then yeah, I would probably signpost to that person and go, and maybe even preface it with, I, I just don't feel like I'm able to support you because I'm going through it and I'm afraid that I would say or do something that might be more harmful. So I'm going to send you to Mary Sue over there and she's going to, but I just, but, sending you loads of love or something, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
whatever's
exactly.
appropriate, showing you have empathy, but you don't think you're the best person because you're already going through your own stuff. That's what I would
Exactly.
say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I kind of agree. And I think the other thing we also get hooked on as a manager is that we shouldn't shouldn't show tears. And actually, if you have got a good relationship with them, you can just say, "Look, I'm sorry, I'm really feeling this too." And I
Yes.
think there's nothing wrong with that. And I
Mm-mm.
think we need to get away from this fact that we shouldn't show emotions at work
Yeah.
because we're all only human after all.
Absolutely. And, that's again, we're not robots. And, I have had some amazing bosses. One in particular he's a very good friend of mine now. And one thing that drew me to him, not only his energy and that connection, but he cared, his empathy. And so I could go to him for anything, and he could come to me for
Yeah,
anything, even though he was my boss.
yeah,
And that relationship was a trusted one. And that's really crucial. And so, if you have that relationship, hopefully many people do, yeah, cry with it. Like, you're
yeah.
there with them, you're with them.
Yeah, exactly. And I was very lucky. I had a team member who we were working remotely, so it was start of pandemic, and she would r ring me most days, and she was a team member, and she would say, "How are you today?" And
Yes.
I'd say, "Oh, not so good today," and she'd go, "Well, it's understandable. What are you going to do nice for yourself today?" And she'd just check in with me.
Yeah.
And I will remember that because she really did have a gift there. And that's what we need more of in the workplace. No
Absolutely. And that's a
pressure.
great point.
Yeah. Yeah, just checking in with each other and checking, and I think that taught me a lot about how to say things in that period, which I probably wouldn't have had before. And when I look back, I have evolved. So probably when I look back 20 years ago, I probably wasn't as good a manager as I probably would be now. So,
Yes.
you learn from your experiences, but it's how we get that across to people to help them when they haven't had those experiences.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes. And I had amazing people at my job, not just the HR manager and the
Yeah,
managers, but friends that I'm still friends with to this day that I'll never, ever forget, ever.
exactly. Exactly. All right. So, how do you create that safe, confidential space for people who are grieving?
Yeah, I mean, my work, because I have clients, internationally, is all via Zoom. And I was actually speaking to a client today about how actually you don't lose that connection, even though it's via Zoom. Some clients will be in their robes,
Yeah,
I'm like, sorry, I just got like, great, fine, just their comfort of their own home. So that I think actually is really a beautiful thing that
yeah,
we can do and just log in. Um, but it really is about allowing them to hear, to see, say, and to feel anything that they need to say and anything that they need to feel without judgment and also validation and going like, yeah, exactly. Um, Hopefully we have great friends and family supporting us, but it isn't always the case. But even if we do, which I did, and still do, but some things I don't feel I can say
yeah,
to them because they're emotionally attached. They don't want me to hurt. They don't. So we're kind of trying to protect their emotions and we don't want them to worry about us and all that. Well, you can say anything to a third party person who's your
yeah,
support, and that's where the safety comes in. They
yes,
go, I've never told anyone this before. It's like, well, it's only staying here, it's only the four walls. And so that for me, you can see kind of just some of the pain lifting because they're able to get it out of their body and out of their mouth.
yeah. No, that makes total sense because you are very conscious that you're putting more emotional strain on your family and your friends sometimes. So, just having that safe
Yeah.
space makes absolute sense. So, when someone is deep in grief, how do you help them start thinking about rebuilding their life while still honoring their loss?
Yes, I mean it's a great question. So the reality is that when someone is deep in their grief, it is about just being very, very kind to yourself and not trying to push yourself too much. Um, what I always try to do is offer hope. Not only in my own life experience, because most of them will have heard my story on a podcast or whatever. They know a
Yeah,
little bit on my website, and so therefore, then they can go, okay, like if she's here, I can trust that maybe she can help me get there. I don't say small because to me, they're big. I mean,
yes.
any movement is big, right? So I'll just say incremental steps
Mm.
that lead to monumental change. So when I went through my grief certification program with David Kessler, who is like the grief expert known in America, but also in the world, he said you can fully live and fully grieve at the same time.
Yeah,
Those two things can coexist. And that blew my mind because we think that we either have to be steeped in grief and we can't fully live, or what if we start laughing and have
yeah,
like a bit of joy, like then we got the guilt going on with the grief. So really it is about being able to come one step forward to keep moving, and the honoring of the loved one is that talking about them. Tell me about Jack. Tell me about him. Tell me about your dad. I want to know. This is honoring them. And there is a level of healing that takes place. So I always want to show them that there is hope. And while we'll never get over the loss of our loved ones, because people go, well, how long will you grieve? I'm like, well, how long are they going to be dead? Or how long am I going to be alive? Like forever, right? Like as long as I'm
Exactly.
alive, but I can fully live and fully grieve at the same time.
Yeah, you can. And it's something after the initial, I think, loss, you realise that, but it takes a while to get to that stage, doesn't it? And
A
nobody can say
hundred
how long it's going
percent.
to be because, as we've said before, everybody's different. Yeah, absolutely. So that's really sound advice, and I love that. I love what you've just shared there. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm,
I shall remember that one.
mm.
Now, can you share some examples of grief and how it manifests differently for different people? Because I think we have this one one size fits all idea, and I don't think it is it?
No, it's not linear at all. Like, and it's not like this is the rule book, you know, women cry, men don't. I mean, there is no rules to it. It can manifest itself in so many different ways. Anger and grief go hand in hand. Guilt and shame and grief go hand in hand. Depression, anxiety, road rage, um, crying all the time, not crying. It's like this silent killer, where you're just, again, full force, like you just go to work the next day, and just, um, and it definitely can manifest itself in a physical ailments as well. So you can have, of course, you've got migraines and IBS and joint pain and neck pains and backaches and hip ache. We store our trauma in our hips.
Yeah.
So usually, I mean, I have a bad hip, and it's like, yeah, there's, that makes sense when I heard that.
Mm.
So it can really truly manifest itself physically, but it also can emotionally manifest.
Yeah, and that's so true because I look back at those different scenarios that I've had, and one I shut away and just kept it hidden, thought I'd got to be strong. The other one, I went the complete opposite. So it's something we need to just realize people just need support and accept it for what it is.
100%.
Yeah. So the final question, and then I will ask you to recap where people can find you so that they know. So last question is for someone watching who has recently lost a loved one, what would be your key message to them about moving forward with their grief?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the key message, I think, is a little bit of what we've been talking about as far as being really kind and gentle with yourself. This is a really difficult time. Like, this is something that you would be as kind to your friend or your loved one. You need to show yourself that
Yeah,
kindness and that self-care and that love, because we're so much harder on ourselves
we can.
than anybody else is. And grief is a really lonely road, but the message I want to say is you do not need to do it alone. Like that, you get your support people around you. One of the things that was super important for me was, one of the biggest things is, my group of people got smaller, but they were my people. They're the ones who stuck. Then there, anybody who was kind of toxic or energy draining vampire, I either put them on a shelf and thought, I can't deal with them right now, or I kicked them off the shelf. And I remember saying to my therapist, like, I think I have a black heart. And she's like, why? I go, because I haven't shed a tear. Bye, bye. But she's like, no, 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 this is what people need to do. And it was really important. And then you surround yourself with those people and find a professional if you can. But the other part I want to say that I think is really important is, not many people find a professional right away,
No,
right? I mean, I didn't get therapy until 15 months after my dad and right after my mom. So it takes time. So it is the support of your family and the support of your friends. Ask yourself, what is it that you need today? right now, this very moment. I need to eat popcorn and watch Netflix. I need to check out. I need to go to Zumba. Like, what is it that you need?
Yeah.
I just need to cry and go to bed. That's okay.
Yeah, and it's absolutely fine. Do what suits you, what you need. And I think that's a really important message to end with. And I really appreciate this and your time. So before we finish, just share where people can find you. So people are looking for this support, and it's really important that we, give them that option because clearly, from all your experience, there is a wealth there that you can help them with. So please,
Yeah.
Lisa, do share.
Yes. And I'd be happy to have a chat with anybody. It was obviously free consultation, just to see if it's a right fit, because it may or may not be. But my website's holisticlifecoaching.org.uk. And on there, you can see, I mean, you can see all the services, all the prices, everything is there. And I can be found on Instagram at holistic underscore coach underscore Lisa. But if you go to my website, like you'll find everything there.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for your time. That has been incredibly helpful, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
And thank you, listeners. Until the next time, take care.